happen. Anyway, okay, so we're still doing the introduction on, on Revelation, and I think, did you determine where we left off, Carl?
No, I didn't write it down.
It was, let me see, I think we're at where it says numbers in Revelation. If you go down.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, but again, talking about the symbolic nature of Revelation, and that's what we need to get comfortable with before we start reading it. But we have to realize, this symbolism isn't just a part of the book of Revelation. Throughout the whole Bible, the writers in the Bible talk in this symbolic language. But what we do is we just kind of pass over it. I had a couple of things I just jotted down at the last before I came. One was, you can go the whole book of Ezekiel, a good portion of the book of Daniel, and you go, what the heck is, what the heck is all of this? What's this about the wheel inside of a wheel? And, that was even the theme song of the Thomas Crown Affair, the old movie, the Thomas Crown Affair, but their theme song was about the wheel within a wheel. And it's, what is that? And people still can't quite figure out what it is that he's talking about. But in Psalm, like they're in the book of Psalms, in Psalm 74, in verse 13, he's giving praise to God for, I think, bringing the people out of Egypt, okay, during the Exodus. There's people that say it has to do with creation also, but he says, you destroyed the sea by your strength. You shattered the heads of the sea monsters in the water. And it's like, what's he talking about in there? What's this about the sea? But see, the sea to the Israelites talked about darkness and death, and you won't find a single passage that's good when it talks about the sea. Okay, it's always about bad things. And then what's these sea monsters that what did it say? He shattered their heads. What are these sea monsters? And so it's just a matter of, he's talking about evil, but they're giving this symbolic language to it. Now, the New Revised Standard, the NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version, instead of sea monster, says dragons. So again, so that's symbolism. In Judges 5, this is after one of Deborah's conquests there, but he says, the men of Zebulun were not concerned about their lives. Naphtali charged into the battlefields. Kings came and they fought. The kings of Canaan fought at Tanakh by the waters of Megiddo, but they took no silver as plunder. Now here's the symbolic part. It says, from the sky, stars fought from their paths in the heavens, and they fought against Sisera. And Sisera was the bad guy in the battles. Okay, but he's saying the stars fought. So the stars are symbolic for some heavenly being that they're crediting for giving them the victory. So that that kind of language isn't totally strange. Oh, you know what? Before we get too far into it, I had answers to a couple of questions. We talked about who wrote the book of Revelation, and we were talking about which John it was, and who's this John the Elder. Hang on, I brought something. Where to put it? I went to the big book. On this commentary on the book of Revelation from the Concordia Commentary, Lewis Brighton was the denomination's go-to guy for Revelation. Okay. He says, okay, let me see. I got the breath to read it. Let's take a little while, but it'll show you the confusion that people don't know. He says the author calls himself John. but he nowhere indicates which John he might be. In the New Testament, there are three well-known persons named John: John the Baptist, John Mark, and the Apostle John, who was the son of Zebedee and the brother of James. There's two others mentioned in passing. Many manuscripts have John as the name of Peter's father, and another John was a member or an associate of a family of Annas, or the high priest. Conceivably, the author of Revelation could be any of the first three, or even another John not mentioned in the New Testament. The author just calls himself John without any identifying descriptions such as apostle, disciple, son of Zebedee, or brother of James. He assumes that his hearers would know who he was. Interpreters in the modern era, for the most part, have rejected the early church tradition that John the Apostle and the son of Zebedee was the author of Revelation. So they're saying, modern scholarship, I don't know how modern to him, because Brighton was an old guy, but so that they've now rejected that it was John the Apostle. He says, but beyond this, there's no agreement as to who this John might be. Many scholars early in the 20th century favored an individual called John the Elder. See, that came up last week. Mentioned by Papias, who's a church father in the 2nd century, in a fragment quoted by Eusebius, the church historian. Even John the Baptist, together with his pupils after his death, has been suggested as the author. More recently, the author has been called John the Prophet. Anyway, he goes on and on. Now, I think in the end, he takes the position that it's John the Apostle, but he's not, he's not real hard, fast, on it. But I just thought that it was interesting that that even the guy who can write a book this thick, after all the study, all you can do is say, hey, this is what's been thought of over the years, and that's it. Pastor Roger.
I sort of agree with him. I have a timeline here. It says that in AD 27, Jesus calls John the son of Zebedee to follow him. 30, John becomes a leader in the early church. AD 67, Peter and Paul are executed, and John takes up residence at Ephesus. AD 70, the Romans destroy Jerusalem and the church is scattered. AD 90, John writes his gospel and letters. 93, John is exiled to the island of Patmos. And in 95, John writes Revelation. That's the timeline.
Again, though, people do. I'm not saying whoever wrote that timeline's wrong. I'm just saying people have different opinions and they piece their information, together, because the ancients didn't live like we do, and they don't date everything, and they didn't write stuff on a calendar. Hey, were you guys online able to hear Roger pretty good? Okay, well, I was just going to bring that up because I was watching last week's video recording, and Roger and Larry both made pertinent questions, but I had a hard time hearing it. Everybody else I could hear, but out of their microphones, I couldn't. So anyway, that's good. So everybody talking to the microphones.
God always gives me the defective one.
Yeah, I know.
Thanks going, Carl.
Anyway, so that's as far as we can go as far as who the author is. Tradition seems to always want to lean towards John the Apostle. Probably just because it's easy. He was the youngest apostle, supposedly, so he would have lived longer. Don't know. Second question, or second point that I picked up on, see, when I watch the recordings, because a lot of times, because I'm watching the screens, I'm watching the group, I'm looking at my notes, and I'm talking, giving people answers and stuff like that, but a lot of times maybe the question isn't resonating with me properly. So Carl had brought up something. Carl's going, what did I bring up? Carl had brought up when we were talking about why the temple wasn't mentioned. And Carl said, well, maybe to those Christian writers, it wasn't as big of a deal, as to the Jews. But then when I was listening, I was thinking, yeah, but all the Christian writers were Jews. you know, and then, and this has nothing to do with the temple here. This is something important to remember when we read scriptures. All of the writers were Jews, okay? And they weren't out to start a new religion. They were carrying on Judaism the way that they thought that Judaism should be carried out, and that the old Jews, the Old Testament Jews, were doing it wrong. And that's why Jesus was yelling at them all the time. You know, I mean, you know, when he's in, when Jesus is in debate and arguments or, you know, whatever with the Jews, he's always basically saying, you're doing it wrong. God wants it done this way. You're doing it wrong. So the writers, his disciples, were all baptized Jews, and they were carrying on, I think, what they thought was Judaism. You know, not out to start a, you know, it's much like Martin Luther. You know, when Martin Luther was roaming around Germany causing his troubles, he wasn't out setting out at the beginning to start a new religion. He was trying to correct the Roman Catholics, his church. You know, he was an Augustinian monk in the Roman Catholic Church. They weren't even the Roman Catholic Church then. You know, the Roman Catholic Church didn't become the Roman Catholic Church until Council of Trent, which is in the 1600s or late 16th century. I forget, but it was after all the Luther stuff. You know, then they identified as the Roman Catholic Church. You know, like, yeah, but before that, they were just the Catholic Church, and Luther was trying to do the same things I think that the apostles were. So anyway, I wanted to bring those points up. Okay. So when we're talking about the symbolism, I've got here on the handout Numbers and Revelation. You have that on your sheets, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Anyway, so numbers mean something symbolically in the Bible. Okay. So it's not just a matter of, we have 7 of these things, that 7, unless you can identify it as he is counting something, you know, like that. So if he says, yeah, there was 412 soldiers that came to my door, it's that part's not symbolic. Okay. So, but the numbers, like I've got on the sheet here, is the number 1 talks about unity, primacy, and sovereignty. Divine completeness of Christians saw this number as symbolic of God the Father. Okay. The number three always signifies some important event in salvation history. Jesus' ministry lasted 3 years. He arose from the dead on the 3rd day. The earth was separated from the waters on the 3rd day. It's one of the 4 perfect numbers Christians see. See this number is symbolic of the Trinity. Okay. You know what? I should have done a better job of giving more examples of that. But so number 4, this is the number signifies God's creative works in association with the earth, the 4 seasons, the 4 winds, the 4 corners of the earth. All those things are talking about earth and creation in there. Because we know there's not 4 corners to the earth. You know, he's talking symbolically to mean something else. He's talking about God's creation of the.
About the 4 horses of the apocalypse, is that a number 4 for this?
Well, it could be. I mean, because you know, well, because we'll see, and the whole thing is symbolic. So when he says 4, because I guess he could have come up with a 5th item that was disaster on earth, you know, from the 4 that he had. So maybe that, you know, maybe that is that. But what I'm saying is that's what you have to look at when you come to something. And if it says, we'll use that, the 4 horsemen, is he meaning something by the 4 horsemen? Because the 4 horsemen are attacking people in the earth.
Am I wrong? But wasn't there a 5th horse?
I don't know.
I thought I read somewhere there was a 5th horse. But
Was that Jesus? Was that Jesus?
Yeah.
Huh?
I'm not sure,
Yeah.
but I remember reading something. I read so much that
Yeah.
I know I have to
Ah.
go back, but yeah, I thought there was something about a fifth force.
Yeah. Okay, 6 is symbolic of man who was created on the 6th day, a symbol of man in rebellion against God. This is where the number 666 would come from, because it's like, it shows that we're going to see in 7, it says this is the second perfect number. I'll go back to 6, but 7 is the second perfect number, signifying perfection and fullness, particularly spiritual perfection. It's the number of the Holy Spirit and the number of the covenant. And 666 is one number below that perfection, that completeness of, God's plan. And so the 666 would just be kind of like a trinity of imperfection. So, okay. What else is it? What comes after 6? I mean 7, 8. Oh yeah. 8, the number symbolizing salvation, rebirth, resurrection, and regeneration. 8 people were saved on the ark. An Israelite child was reborn into the covenant on the 8th day of his life. How was he reborn into the covenant on his 8th day? Snip, snip. A vasectomy? No. No, circumcision was on the 8th, was on the 8th day. And on the 8th, let's see, and Jesus was resurrected from the dead on the 8th day, which is, because the 7th day was the Sabbath, and then he raised, which would be the 8th day, symbolically, it would be on that 8th day. 10 is the third perfect number, which signifies perfection of divine order. Things like the 10 commandments and, wherever you're going to see 10. 12 is the fourth perfect number, signifying divine government, the covenant people, the church. It's the number of Israel, descendants of 12 physical sons of Jacob, as well as the number of the new covenant church, spiritual descendants of Jesus, which are the apostles. Okay. And then 40, the number signifying trial and or consecration, the series of 40 days in the flood narrative. Moses' 40 days on Mount Sinai. Jesus' 40 days of testing in the wilderness. And then 50 is the number symbolizing divine deliverance, mercy, the celebration of the Jubilee every 50 years. Like that. So I don't know. We ought to celebrate the Jubilee year now. Just every 50 years, all debts are forgiven. I guess that works if you have debts. I guess it doesn't work if you're the one holding the debt. I never did figure out. I guess the idea is that God blesses those who forgive the debt and somehow makes it up to them. If somebody owed you $100,000 and you have to forgive it, you're out $100,000.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that. Who's that? Dr. John.
Yeah, as you read through the book of Revelation, you'll notice number 7 is really important for it. It's mentioned 54 times in the book.
Is it? Yeah. Yeah, no. The numbers are, you'll find them throughout scriptures. The numbers are there, and they're not just there because there's 7 of them. It means something what it's saying that the 7 is. And that's why we have to be, comfortable with it. We have to know, when is it literal? When is it symbolic? In Revelation 5, it talks about, I don't have it open. Anyway, but it talks about the myriad of angels, and it was myriads by myriad, 10,000 times 10,000. What's 10,000 times 10,000? A whole bunch. A whole bunch, that's right. Actually, actually it is, I think it's 100 million. But I mean, but it doesn't mean that there's 100 million angels. It means there's a whole bunch. That he's seeing in heaven, because Revelation 5 is a heavenly scene. And so what he's saying is that, hey, heaven's not empty. No matter what we might think, heaven's not empty. There's 10,000 times 10,000 angels. But if you walk around and tried to count them, you wouldn't necessarily come up with 100 million of them. He's just saying a whole bunch. This goes back to the number 1,000. We talks about 1,000 years or 1,000 anything. When I think it was Peter quoting somebody, said, the cattle on 1,000 hills belong to the Lord. Just that 1,000 is just a number that the people back then couldn't comprehend. Like nobody lived to be 1,000 years. Just a whole bunch. Because the question then comes up, well, who owns the cattle on hill number 1001? Like that. So that's what you got to do with numbers, Roger.
For instance, when
Number 4,
mentioned the four horsemen, Revelation 6 verses are mentioned, and the 4 only. There's a white, a fiery red, a black, and a pale. So there's no 5 horses.
But there might be somewhere else. I don't.
Could
That's
be.
why I asked, was it Jesus? Because I know Jesus rides on a white horse.
Yeah, but that's later in the book.
I understand. Yeah. So anyway, so it's to be careful when we're reading those. Let's go on to the charts here, and we're not going to do much with. Oh, I've got on the next line. What about numbers such as 144,000 twice in Revelation? It's going to talk about the 144,000, which are made up of 12,000 of 12 tribes. So does that mean for whichever part that it's talking about? Because I think, if I remember right, the 2 mentions of it are talking about kind of 2 different things. Because it's easy in symbolism to talk about different things in the same language. And it's just like, so then do we say again, is there 12 tribes times 12,000 in each tribe, or is he making a point? There's 144,000, which is again that the 12 of the apostles, the 12 of the tribes of Israel, times 10, which is a perfect number, times 3 times 10, which is the Trinity. 10, 10, 10 is 1,000. So you got the 12,000 and Pastor Hoffman.
The
Yeah.
the symbolism of 144,000, I always thought it was the 12 tribes of Israel plus the 12 apostles, which made the church, Jesus Christ himself, the cornerstone. And then I would always say that, and 1,000, that's a perfect number. That would be the perfect thing. But unfortunately, as we see in the churches, things are not always perfect.
In God's church, things are perfect.
Right.
That's the invisible church. We're the visible church. I don't know how many of you are real Christians and how many of you are pagan scoundrels. I mean, no, but that's the way you look at the visible church, okay? Is that you have people that gather as church and not all are saved. Jesus talked about the wheat and the tares. And the tares are the people that don't belong there, but he says, don't tear out, don't pluck out the tares because you might uproot the wheat. So we know in the church there are. Now in that same parable, it talks about one day Jesus will send the angels to harvest the wheat and burn up the tares. That's last days language, that's in there. But again, that goes back to that symbolism when he, even there in parables, when he says wheats and tares, he's not talking about wheats and tares.
You're probably gonna cover this later on, but I had a question. when
But
we
if it's
get-
after chapter 1, it probably won't be for months.
Oh, okay. I probably won't be around then. Sometime in October, when I cruise. The 144,000. It says they were sealed. I had a question. How were they sealed? Were they in the scroll? Or were their names already in the book of life and that's how they're sealed, or how, what does it
You
mean?
you gotta remember, and this is one of the ones where I'll listen to the video later in the week and I'll go, oh, yeah, now I understand where he's, asking from. If you look at the 144,000 as being church in its entirety, God has sealed his church. What do you mean? He's given that protection. It says that the Holy Spirit seals the believers. So, because you're talking about the seals on the scroll.
Yeah,
See, those seals on the scroll, I gotta remember this. The seals on the scroll, remember Daniel, when we studied Daniel a couple of years ago, whenever that was, we studied it for a couple of years. At the end of Daniel, he was given the scroll, and he was told to roll up the scroll and seal it. It's going to be like for a later time. It's not for you. It's for a later time. That's my paraphrase. And that's what Jesus is opening in Revelation 5. So as all this stuff connects.
yeah, but there were 7 seals on the scrolls, weren't there?
Well, but again, it's symbolism. Well, yeah, but it's symbolism. I don't know that Daniel, and when he says seal the scroll, Daniel doesn't have a scroll, I don't think. I think it's the knowledge or the prophecies that Daniel was given. And when he says to seal them up, that just means don't worry about them. Just tuck them away. It's going to be for a different time. So I don't think that Jesus in Revelation 5 said, where the heck's that scroll Daniel left around here? He could have, but I don't think that he did. I don't think he did it that way. I think it's, again, the symbolism, of it. And what he's saying is that whatever it is that's been sealed up is now unsealed. Whatever's been hidden is now revealed. So again, that's what I'm saying. That's what you got to do when you read like Ezekiel and Daniel and all of those. Hang on just a second. I got somebody else here. That whoever's got all of this stuff is that it's talking in symbolic language. Like I say, we don't have to look for, we don't have to look for that seal. Who had something? Who? Oh, Denny. Okay.
Yeah, I was just remembering Martin Luther says in his catechisms that God's church on earth is all believers.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's where the believers are. That's what the church means, is that it's all believers. But all believers are in the church, but not everyone who's in the church is a believer. So say you got 100 believers. I'm just making this easy numbers, but I don't want to do the 10,000 times 10,000. But you have 100 believers in a church, and you got 20 unbelievers in a church. Now, so on our attendance, we count 120. How many butts were in the pews, but God's only counting 100. And that's silly, but that's the way you have to look at it. Okay, did you ask?
Well, you're talking about the scroll. Now, somewhere along the line when I was studying, it mentioned that the scroll that Jesus is opening up with the 7 seals is a deed to the earth. That the
Again,
deed was
that's
bought by Adam and Eve, and the devil had the scroll, and then the scroll was taken from the devil, and Jesus ended up with the scroll, or they ended up in
Well,
heaven.
again, that's a literalistic approach. I'm sure you're reading some kind of dispensationalist.
Oh, yeah,
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 I know.
tons of them.
Yeah, no, and they do it because you also have to do, Ezekiel, who's at the same time as Daniel, or pretty close to the same time. He was told to roll up the scroll and do what with it?
Eat it.
Eat it.
Yeah,
Yeah, so You have to do it in the context of who's writing, when they're writing, what they're writing for, but that symbolism stays the same. So what, to at least leave it here, whatever the scroll means, God is telling people how to handle it, but it's not a rolled up piece of paper. Deacon Joe.
Yeah, you were talking about wheat and tares being together in the church. I don't know whether you guys remember, it was 2 or 3 weeks ago, Skip was talking about having gone to a convention where pastors gathered. I don't know what it was. I don't remember, but he said Lutheran pastors, and he was talking with them, and half of the pastors there voiced the fact that they didn't believe in the virgin birth.
Oh,
Now, if you don't believe in the virgin birth,
I will forget about
that ends it right there. I mean, you know.
I find it hard to believe that. I find it hard to believe that would be LCMS pastor.
He said
Yeah.
that the group of them were
No,
gathered.
I know that they do surveys
Yeah,
of Christians and of pastors, and the things people deny, because what they say is, and we're gonna see this in the Genesis class on Sundays, when you're talking about creation week and the things that people will deny that are stated clearly in the, in the script. Hang on just a second, Pastor. What they deny, Barna had a study, George Barna, the Barna polls or whatever they are. I don't know what they are. They're like the old Gallup polls where they question people and they say, "Are you a Christian?" You say yes. They go, "Do you believe this, this, this?" And you say yes or no. And then they do the poll. They said it was 63 or 69% of Americans claim to be Christians. Okay. And they said 6% had a Christian worldview. A worldview is how you look at life. And do you do it from a Christian perspective or do you do it from the world's perspective? Do you do it from a biblical perspective? No, I live my life this way because the Bible says this, or it's, yes, I'm a Christian, but not just throw out, a common example, but I believe that abortion's okay. Because in this day and time, you have to do those kind of things. But so 69% of Americans say that they're Christians, and 6% say they have a worldview, which means, do you live your life by what the Bible says? I'm simplifying that, but it goes back to what people would deny. Pastor Callahan.
Yeah, I mentioned it before, but it shocked,
Do the microphone so that people online need to hear your pearls of wisdom.
it shocked the daylights out of me. And the ELCA had their convention. I mentioned this before. And one of the resolutions was there are other ways to heaven other than Jesus. And a layman got up and said, well, Jesus said, "I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me." They passed that resolution that there's other ways to heaven other than Jesus. Now, if you believe that, you might as well forget the whole thing.
Yeah, why? Why be?
On Sunday morning.
It's like, what? Yeah, they would be more honest. You're right. They would be more honest if they said, "I have a tea time on Sunday morning." Like I don't, but Roman Catholic Church is like that. Roman Catholic Church back in the old days used to be real strict. Not only did you have to be a Christian, you had to be a member of the Roman Catholic Church. Otherwise, you're kind of the separated brethren. And now the Roman Catholic Church says that if, I don't want to simplify this too much, but it's something like, if you're searching out God to the best of your ability, you're in. So if you're being the good Muslim, you're being the good Hindu, and you're following to be a good Hindu and a good Muslim, because that's the way you're reaching out to God, you're in. It's called the, they have a name for it. I can't think of what it is. I'll look it up. Let me do Carl then, Roger.
Okay.
Yeah, Carl.
I want to go back to where we were talking about Ezekiel. Is it proper for us then, discussing symbolism, that they gave Ezekiel the scroll to eat, which would probably meant that he was not to share with anybody? Would that be a?
Well, okay, we're getting in, I'd have to look in Ezekiel, but what I think what it's saying is you've got the knowledge, you've gone as far as you can. Seal it up. When he's saying eat it, same thing as sealing it up. You know, it's for another time. You know, that's the best I can say, but I will have an answer for, you know, for next week, because again, those are things that are important in the message
That's where the church
when we,
copied up.
you know, when we get to them. Because in fact, all this stuff starts out when John is called up to the heavenlies and he looks in to see what's happening in heaven, and he sees all these angelic creatures around the throne, and they're saying, how long will I may be getting my stories mixed up from chapters, but they're you know, pleading to the Father, you know, when's all this going to be ready? And then in walks Jesus. I mean, literally, that's pretty much what it says. In walks Jesus, sits down on the throne and starts opening the scroll. And it's like, what the heck is this? You know? But I mean, you can see like a king back in days of yore would probably open a scroll and say, hear ye, you know, and wherever it goes from there.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on the ELCA saying that there were other ways to heaven besides Jesus. Finally makes sense. That old rock song, Stairway to Heaven, finally makes sense to me.
Yeah.
There must be other ways.
Deacon Joe's old thing, you know, we have a stairway to heaven and a highway to hell.
Ah!
Shows how much traffic.
Yeah, that's a traffic report, but because it's so, you know, see, people read the scriptures today and they want to apply 21st century values to a first century document. Those people were different. They talked differently, but that's why people say, well, surely God wouldn't do this. Well, in our world today, maybe surely God wouldn't, but that isn't what it was written for, and that isn't who it was written to. You know, it was written to a different, you know, to a different crowd. Anyway, okay, so we'll have to stop there because it's time to stop. Anybody have anything online? A question?
Gene,
Who-
somebody on
Oh,
Zoom
I'm
got a
sorry, who's
radio
doing what?
plan? Somebody on Zoom, a radio plan, because we keep hearing it. We keep
No, it's
turning it off here.
should have turned.
We keep turning it off, but it comes back on.
I don't think it's coming out of here. No, it's not coming out of here. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so, pardon? Okay, Dennis, are you going to do the songs? Okay, and any question, nobody got questions
Yeah.
here? Oh,
Gene,
okay.
yeah, one more follow-up on the
Everybody,
comment
Troy's got
about,
a question. You guys take care. Okay, go.
yeah,
Ron.
so the comment about eating the scroll in Ezekiel 3. And
Yeah.
so Revelation 10, when we get to it, I'd like to explore how that kind of eating the scroll comes in verse 9. I went to an angel and he said to me, take and eat it. It will make your stomach bitter, but in your mouth it'll be sweet as honey. The idea that you're given something and to hold on to and to cherish and then to prophesy with it.
Yeah, and that's Ezekiel 10. Is that what you said? Ezekiel 10?
That's in Revelation 10
Oh, Revelation 10.
with the angel and the little scroll, but it parallels, I think, I'm
Right.
wondering, the Ezekiel 3,
Yeah,
same kind of approach to eating a scroll.
yeah, good point. I'd assign everybody a chapter in Revelation to stay ahead of me to let me know what's coming up. Well, I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, I taught, the last time I taught to a group, Revelation was in 2013. In 2016, I did it online on a blog, a friend of mine's blog. So it's not like I read the book of Revelation right before I came here today. It does? Okay, good. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dave. How's lighter today? Good? Okay, we're gonna sing. If you guys flash off, thank you. Adios. If you want to hang around and listen to us Caterwall.
Yeah, they're short. The word. This right out of the head, guys. It's supposed to be, yes. And praise is not. First line of verse number 6. Earth is not a good word.
Number 960. I praise